Dave, thanks again for joining us. 3-time guest, the Dave Castro hat trick.
Recurring guest.
Yeah. First thing I wanted to ask you is that we're talking to you on the heels of stage one. I was shocked by the number of people who didn't understand what stage one was going to be from a fan's perspective, that it wasn't going to be live and, they weren't going to be able to watch things as they went down, in real time. And I'm just curious, can you take us back through the decision-making process, who was involved, and then how you arrived to the current format, or the format that we saw?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, I'm not too shocked, and I will take some responsibility from our team. Like, you guys are way in, and you guys pay a lot of attention, right? So you guys know what's going on. I think people who aren't as in as we are, it was easy for them not to quite grasp the nuances and not see how we're actually running it, because they don't live in the sport like we do. And I think we could have messaged it out a little better that, hey, this is how it's going. We didn't talk. We did point to it and we did say this is what we're doing, but we didn't talk a lot about it. Okay. We didn't put out the word as well as maybe we should have. So some of it is on us, and then some of it is just, as we talked earlier, people just being
people.
Yeah, exactly. So early on, when we decided we were going to go to this format, we had a discussion, myself, Justin, Eric, and Andrew. Andrew's another member of the team, about having this online portion and then qualifying minimal people to the event here in California. And the reason we were doing that is because the second surge of COVID was going on and everything was, looking not positive. So we didn't want to try to run a bigger event and have to likely cancel that. So we decided on this format where there'd be this online games qualifier to get them to the 5. And there was a lot of different ways to run that. And, some people initially right away said, hey, why don't we do something like Rogue did? And I wasn't too familiar with what Rogue did. I had seen on Instagram like a 4-screen capture of 4 athletes going at the same time. And so that looked cool. But one of the things I knew and one of the things I had heard was, well, it really, it wasn't ideal for all athletes. So when you put a premium on things, it put a premium on the viewer experience, on content for the world, but it necessarily didn't put a premium on the experience for the athletes. And out of that event, they could do that, and that's the decision they chose to make, because that event wasn't a qualifier for the games.
Yeah.
And so since this event had a lot to it, this event has, these guys want to go to the next stage, we needed to figure out a way to make it fair for all the athletes, regardless of where you were in the world. And so that's what we had to start with. Okay, we're not going to make them go at the same time, because if you do that, you're going to have to pick one time zone to anchor off of, or one starting time, and then multiple people are going to be affected, most likely negatively, by that time slot. So then we came up with this block idea where basically from 6, I think it was 12-hour blocks, so say from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., everyone would have to get the workouts done, and then from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., there'd be another block. And when I say the workouts, 2 to 3 tests in that block. And we started laying out that. We worked with the athlete council on what that would look like, and then we shifted them to like 7 to 7, and we played around with a lot of variance. But even in something like that, someone always was at a disadvantage. Right. There was always someone like, okay, well, the first block is good, but the second block I have to work out at like 10 at night. And iterating on this and going through it and discussing it with the athlete council, discussing it with our team, I was sitting at my computer one night just looking at all the options, because we had to make a call. It was getting close to that period where we had to commit to something. And I was like, you know what? This is helping me understand we should not do it this way. And this way is because someone is going to be left out at a certain point. So to make it, and at this stage, I just mentioned how Rogue put a premium on the viewer experience. We're putting a premium on the athlete experience. So we then decided, hey, let's make these blocks in their local times, and the athletes can compete when they want to in ideal time, so everybody has an ideal time. What that then created was essentially, these really large windows of, because to be fair, we couldn't release people's scores or put scores out to the world. Otherwise, the Aussies would be at a huge disadvantage from the get-go. And then at the end, the West Coast athletes would have a huge advantage because they're the last to go and they could have seen everyone else's time. So what that created was you had a start time and then an end time, and we couldn't publish any scores. We decided not to publish any scores until that end time, which was absolutely the right way to do it, which then created this huge block of time where no scores are coming in and you're not finding anything, you're not seeing any live content. So fans who weren't considerate of what we were trying to accommodate were very disappointed and very vocal about it. But, you know, I believe what we did is absolutely the right way to do what we did for how we did it.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, it seems like, and this is one of the things we talked about on, like, I was in the comment section on YouTube saying that, like, at this level for the games, you have to prioritize fairness over entertainment, I guess, at that point. And that's not just something coming from CrossFit, that's the athletes too. There's like, the athletes ultimately want fairness as well, and although they may not vocalize it, I don't know, it seems like it felt like a very selfish thing for people to be like, no, I want entertainment first. And then these athletes whose livelihoods and seasons.
You know what's funny about that is, had we done it any other way, the athletes would have been super vocal in how unfair it was. Since we made it very fair to them, they're not at all vocal about that. I don't know, maybe a few have said how fair it was, but you know, that is very true. And it's funny because we get accused of not caring about the athletes, but you know, we obviously do and have, and this was another expression of that. You know what was really cool, when I was sitting back, so we had this spreadsheet, an internal doc that had everyone's scores coming in, and like I kind of wish the world had that, but obviously we couldn't, because I was sitting at my computer watching this thing for hours. It felt like hours on end, going, oh shit, here's a new score, oh here's another score, and just watching people's scores come in. And for me, that was exciting, just seeing as they're being input into the system. And the way the format was set up, I was seeing scores from block 1 being inputted while scores from block 2 are also coming in at the same time. And I was like glued to the monitor for the weekend, just watching all the scores come in and all the changes and all the movement on the. And so by the time we were announcing the block 1 rankings, like we were well into block 2 and seeing the changes and people, you know, Laura not being able to do handstand push-ups and essentially being out. You guys were reporting on how good she was doing, but we knew like, man, she just punted that one.
Yeah, that's tough.
So along the lines of prioritizing athlete experience, obviously that's going to be the priority when you get to stage 2.
Yeah.
But what will the viewer experience be like?
Okay, so stage 2, they become a little more equal, and the viewer experience always, you know, at the games. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. We love dogs on this show.
And people love hearing the dogs chime in too.
We always put a premium on the viewer experience as much as we can at the games, on the visual, to show the race and to lay out the floor. So when you look at, in this stage, it was athlete experience, viewer experience. When we get to the games, we strive to have both of them really high, athlete experience high and viewer experience high. And I think with this year's games, you'll see that, and they'll see that, and they'll get it. And with this reduced field, I mean, that's even more reason why the viewer experience should be much better and higher.
Yeah, and I definitely want to circle back to that a little bit more. But before we, move on from stage 1, obviously you program the events, you put them out there. You kind of have this expectation of what might be possible and what might be coming in as far as the test goes, based on testing it. How did what ultimately happened this past weekend compare to how you expected them to play out, and maybe some notable stuff that you saw?
These guys really crushed the scores that we tested. I expected the friendly Fran not to be in low 3s, but low 4s, I mean. And then the second workout, same thing, or not the second workout, but the Damn Diane, I kind of expected that to be in lower 5s, not as fast as it was. But that being said, and same thing on Nasty Nancy, and their times on all of these were much faster, the fastest times than we expected. The average times were pretty spot on for what we're looking at, but it's always that way with the games. We program workouts, we test workouts, and very rarely do people in the testing do better than they did at the games. One exception might be Julian Alcaraz from Julian from Street Parking. He tested the the kettlebell and again, was it Fibonacci final? No.
Oh,
The kettlebell handstand push-up.
yeah, Fibonacci.
Yeah, Fibonacci final, and he made it look really easy, and his time was great, and so we based everything off of that, the time cap, and at the games that year, only 2 guys finished it. When really that's like at that point, I wanted like half the field to finish it.
Yeah.
And since we based it off of his score, which was actually as fast, if not faster than Matt's, we needed to test that one more.
Yeah.
To get a better baseline, because his time was incredibly fast.
So I'm kind of curious, as a follow-up to that then, what would you say, what was maybe the single most impressive like performance for you that weekend, as far as time, men or female? Like, what was the one that made you be like, whoa, that was, I didn't quite think that was possible yet?
This weekend?
Yeah.
So the 490 front squat for these guys, that's an outlier. I look at the amazing performances, but I also like to see the train wrecks of performances, essentially. And, you know, Laura, what happened to Laura, that like blew me away. Like, that's a highlight. Like, man, you know, the deficit wasn't that deep. And, you know, it was only a couple inches for the women, a little higher for the men. And that she did so poorly on that was a surprise. But, you know, and Matt's 308 on that, the Fran variant, that was very impressive, like almost a minute faster than the second place guy. Let me see some of the other times. You know, the awful Annie times in testing, they were not even close to being that fast. The handstand holds, I actually thought would be a little better.
So I was surprised by that on the men's side. The men's side numbers were a little bit lower. I don't know why.
The men overall average was 105, and the women's overall average was 124. So I was really surprised by that. Yeah. But you know, it's tough, and it's new.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where in a year or so, if we program it again,
which you will, I'm sure,
it won't be an issue. You know?
What do you think about people who said, you know, that really wasn't a good test?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't believe that, but it's fair to say any of these things aren't a good test, because it's, you know, it's opinion, it's
right.
Necessary narrative to create discussion, but I do think it's a fair test because it's a high level test of balance and endurance and mental capacity. You have to stay in there, and you have to stay focused to maintain that hold. And so essentially, you look at Katrin, she showed a high level of grit, a high level of focus, a high level of balance that just, you know, doubled the time of other athletes. And so I think it's a really good test. It's an appropriate test, but I also respect and am open to people not appreciating it as a test. It's not much, it's a lot different, but it's also not much different than when we run handstand or handstand walking courses and test in that environment. It's inverted. It's a necessary skill to test, the balance, the precision.
And I think adding the box too allows a little bit of wiggle room. So you saw a lot of athletes start to move, and it at that point it does start to mimic a little bit of the handstand walk, the dynamic aspect of it.
Well, so when we first programmed it, I was thinking like a 12-foot box. And then as we tested it, Adrian and I think even Dave Eubanks and Justin were like, no, we should use a smaller box. And I think it was Adrian who said, let's use a 4-foot box. I'm like, it's way too small. And then they made it, and Adrian did it, and I was like, yeah, that's it. It's a 4-foot box.
Yeah.
Because it is easier to kind of walk around and move around than it is just to stay stationary. Yeah. Someone had suggested just staying in one spot the entire time. That would have been really hard. Here's the other cool thing we did with that. Well, it's scary, but it's cool, is that we gave them 20 minutes to establish their best time. And why I say that's scary, because if we gave them one attempt, all of these times would be way lower, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I got to look into this. I don't know how many of them like tried and then got better. I think I heard that about Katrin, actually.
I think Katrin's was on her second or third.
Yeah, I heard Katrin got better as she went on, which is surprising, because you'd think that would be something that'd fatigue and you'd lose. But so it's had we done just a one shot at that, the scores would be vastly different.
You'd have a couple 5-second scores in there that basically kick up and flail.
When you look back at the weekend, what, if anything, would you have done differently in programming or organizing stage one?
In programming, maybe it would have taken the event 4 a little longer, made the row 1,500 or 2K, just to get us something. We had 4 4-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute, 21-minute workouts, 3-minute workout with the row. Maybe push that mid between 5 and 10. So get like a 7 2K. What's a good 2K time? Yeah, 7. 7-minute times. Just to get to test that time zone a little better.
Yeah, that was actually my follow up to that. I was, I know when you program, there's themes and purposes, and we've talked about this before on the show. But one of the themes that was apparent was the time duration during day one specifically. So those first 4 tests a little bit shorter, a little bit higher power output, although the stimulus was slightly different. And I was just curious, what was kind of, when you're programming day one and looking at those first few tests, what was really the motivation behind that?
Well, on the day one, the anchor I'd say there was off of the twist of the benchmarks. And so like usually when I'm programming, I have an anchor and then things are built around that. And then the second thing is we kind of got to this point where, okay, we're going to have 4 events in that day. So 4 events that are short are kind of easier for an athlete to manage and recover from and deal with, rather than 3 short, high output events and 1 really long event. It would have just been a really brutal day one if we would have put one of those the long event. So 4 short, I felt more comfortable with the 4 shorter events on day one, and then kind of juicing up day 2 with, and the handstand, where taxing, it's not the same as a 1,000-meter row.
Yeah.
Or it's not it might be the same as the front squat in a different way.
Yeah.
In a different way.
What, if any, input did the athletes have into the programming? As far as, and I know they can't say, hey, I want to do these movements in this order with these amount of reps, but as far as kind of what they wanted the test to look like?
None.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Okay.
the 30 and 30, like the ones who did it. Yeah, we don't discuss this with them.
Okay. Not even the PFAA or anything like that?
No, we didn't discuss. What did we discuss with the PFFA? We might have shared the time blocks with them, and I don't think I was on that call, and the scoring, but we didn't share. We don't share. We're not going to share that
Right,
with them.
okay.
Especially someone like the PFAA, because, we can't be sharing workouts with them because they're a pretty big group that have a lot of different people, and it'd be too hard to keep the integrity of the events, close. And frankly, at this stage, those guys, the unknown and unknowable, that's part of our foundation, and that's part of what they need to be prepared for. And these things were not off the wall. Even the handstand,
Right.
as far outside of the box as that was, it was way inside the box of the scope of possibilities of what to see.
Yesterday, you posted some interesting notes on Instagram about your initial kind of stab at the programming, and there's some ideas that I liked out there. Seeing Linda, the 100 burpees times 2. What were some of the things that were going through your mind in that initial stab, and why did those miss the cut? And what were some things that were the kind of ultimately the line in the sand for you for sifting some of those tests out?
That's a great question. And so at that moment when that sheet was made, that's because I kind of anchored off of this concept. All right, we're going to build off the benchmarks. That's how we're going to program this stage. And then that's when I threw all those down, and I just started writing things out that I thought could be used. Once I started looking at some of them, like let's take Linda, for example. The bench would be a nightmare. The bench would be a nightmare to judge.
Yeah.
And so not necessarily a nightmare, but it'd be challenging. And one of the things, if you look at all of these events that I want to point to, is for the most part, we ended up choosing movements and workouts that had straightforward range of motion. And that was critical to make it completely fair and to give our judges the best chance of success and to set the athletes up for the best chance of success. I had a friend who texted me after the competition and said, hey, did you guys pull them aside and brief them to hit the range of motion and be legit on all their on their technique and range of motion? I was like, no, that was taken into consideration with the selection of the workouts and the movements. And you even look at the handstand hold, super easy to do, and the rules, and there's not much ambiguity, and okay, was that a rep or was that not a rep? Arguably, you could say the toughest of all of those could have been that deadlift and damn Diane.
Yeah.
I might have saw some deadlifts where I was like, okay, that's close. But the thing, too, is what everyone has to remember is what we're seeing isn't necessarily what the judge is seeing.
Exactly.
The judge has a much better view than the camera angle we have. So you got to ultimately go, with the judge's call. And on that sheet you saw, I had put like a 7 times 5 of Fran, so 7 rounds of 5 reps or 5 rounds of 7 reps. I played with either version like that. Maybe too many transitions, maybe at 95 way too light, and that's when we ended up getting to 115, and that's when I was like, okay, I need to slow him down just a tad. Let's bump it up to 21, to 21, 21, 21. So at that point it was, and that was the big challenge. And even I've had that in regionals and at the games when I try to incorporate benchmarks. What's a benchmark that's straightforward and kind of easy to judge?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of there's a lot of movements, period. There's a lot of movements that are hard to put in competition that are like the ring dip.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
For example.
It's tough.
Yeah. And even at this stage, a muscle up, we could have done it, but a muscle up would have been, I would have chosen a bar muscle up over ring muscle up just for the ease of judging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's funny because that's something I don't think a lot of people take into account, right? Like when aspect, and it's almost reverse engineering it a little bit, an aspect of fairness in competition is also making sure that you set the judges up for success so they can best apply the standards to the athletes and keep them accountable. And, at the same time, it makes a little bit more straightforward for the athletes to uphold the standard as well. And it's interesting to hear you talk. I honestly didn't even think about that from the get-go. And
that's a huge consideration whenever making these things. And often, and like with games events, when I brief them to our team, someone like Boz, who's the head judge, will bring up, okay, so this movement's going to be a little challenging to judge. And sometimes, especially at the games, at the in-person events, it's like, hey, let's go there.
Yeah.
The ring handstand push-up at the
yeah.
games
Yeah.
a few years ago. Even the push press last year, got kind of tore up. Although I think the no rep calls were mostly legit. Like there's some movements that are not, and so either of those movements, ring handstand push-up and or the push press that we did with the kettlebells last year at the games, scaling at this level or putting in place at this level could have been a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So that's where it was like everything's a little more core to set up the judges, the athletes, the whole story for success.
Yeah, and one quick more follow-up on that is like, where do you find the line? Like, how do you determine what that line is? Because you mentioned that like in live competition sometimes you're like, hey, let's go there. Like, let's push that line here and let's put these athletes in, and maybe even the judges in this like a little bit more ambiguous spot, a little bit more difficult. How do you determine when is the right time, or is it just kind of like an instinct thing when you look at the whole programming?
Yeah, it's oftentimes just like we've got to challenge ourselves and we've got to grow and we can't be afraid. That year with the ring handstand push-up, we knew it was going to be. It's like we can't be afraid to go there. We can't be afraid to stress and test the system essentially and see how it comes out. Notice we haven't done it in a few years. So, and we do learn, so we have ideas of how to bring it back based off of, so it's necessary for the growth and the development of the sport to test all the systems, the athletes being a system, the judges being a system, the equipment, the spectacle being a system.
What, if any, feedback have you gotten from the athletes about how stage 1 went?
We're actually sending out some feedback. I haven't gotten any personally.
Okay.
We're actually sending out, a couple have emailed me and said, great job, loved it. But I haven't got specific, this would have been better, that. We're sending out some feedback forms to the athletes and some affiliates and some interested parties in the community to ask them to send us more detailed feedback on the whole process and on the events.
Is that new?
If you could say it's new, but I mean, I ran the training department for a long time, and we constantly asked for feedback there. So for me, asking for feedback isn't new. Maybe at this stage, after the games, have we asked for feedback? I don't think so. But we informally asked. We haven't formally collected feedback around the games. We've informally asked for feedback. But what I'm trying to say is in CrossFit, it's not entirely new because we do have sections where getting feedback is a necessary part of the program.
Once again, Matt Fraser and Tia Toomey dominate, as they tend to always do. I'm curious if you think that is good for the sport, having two athletes who are just clearly the best, and when they show up are expected to win and usually do.
Yeah, I think it's great for the sport, but I also think when it's not there, it's also great for the sport. Mm-hmm. So meaning when they're not dominating, guess what? There's going to be some people fighting so hard for that top position, and that's going to be great for the sport. And the reality is, whatever scenario plays out, it's going to be great for the sport because there's so much storyline and so much drama. You know, I'll never forget when Rich announced he was retiring, a bunch of people were like, hey, your sport's going to die. This is the end of the games. There's going to be no interest. And I was like, dude, you're nuts. Like that Rich, you know, God bless him for everything he's contributed to the sport, but he's not the sport and he's not CrossFit.
Right.
He's a very prominent figure in the sport and in CrossFit, but it's much bigger than him. And it's much bigger than Matt Frazier. And it's much bigger than me. And it's much bigger than Greg Glassman. And it's much bigger than Eric Roza. And that's the fucking reality of it. Yeah. The sport, the movement, CrossFit is much bigger than any individual. And so why I say that is because when whatever direction the sport goes with dominance or not dominance, the storyline around that will be amazing and great.
Yeah.
You still think Matt's slipping?
Yeah, and here's why.
Ooh, okay.
Here's why. It's inevitable. It's Father Time. Father Time is undefeated. Father Time is never going to lose, and he is going to continue to age, and pretty soon we will see that in the results, especially as these younger guys come into the field.
That's a little more meta than I expected.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Give yourself some wiggle room there. You mentioned the direction of the sport, and I actually talked about this over the weekend when we were here, but what's it like having the support from, you know, Eric Roza that is, you know, not only like, yeah, you know, go ahead and do what you do, but yeah, let's make this thing huge.
Yeah, it's great. It's amazing. You know, we've never had that in the games department, to put it lightly. Like, we've never had such a booster and a supporter and someone who cares about making, but it's not, you know, it's obviously very visibly the games, but it's everything CrossFit. He cares, and that's what's cool to see. He cares about the affiliates as much. He cares about the training. He wants all aspects of CrossFit to grow, and he's empowering every area to grow to its full potential. And for us in the games, that's exciting. I mean, some of the ideas we're talking about for next, I was just talking to him yesterday about this, and I was like, hey, you know, this at the games is going to be bigger than ever. Not this year's games, but next year's games. I go, there's so many things I have ideas for making everything so much better. And I thanked him because I'm like, that's because you're in this position and you're so supportive. And, you know, and he really believes in holistically it with everything else in CrossFit. And we've known this for years, but this doing well helps the affiliates do well, helps training do well, and every other aspect of CrossFit. The affiliates doing well helps this do well, and helps people get into CrossFit and people change their lives. So all of it's good. And this, you know, I'm biased obviously, but this doing well helps everything.
Yeah.
And the messaging around that will continue to grow where, you know, as we have in the past, you guys know, and we did a little this week, and we'll tell the stories and we'll talk about the community and we'll message from this platform the greatness of CrossFit.
Yeah.
Is there any danger in trying to grow it too big too fast?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think over the years, even the growth we did, you have to be a responsible steward over that. And like I look at examples like the X Games, and the X Games were crushing it in the US with their one event. And then they did this massive scale where they had events all over South America, all over Europe, and because of their success here. And then in like a year or two, they all folded. It was a complete disaster. Yes, and I think I'm pretty aware of that and really like cognizant of not going too far. Hey, we need to take this step, but not that step. There's things we can do to push it, but not be bigger than who we are or what we think we are.
Right.
That's a tough position to take too, especially with such a rabid and passionate fan base when they want, like, it's tough. Like, you can see what the possibilities are at the other side, and it's very easy to want to just jump all those middle steps and make those shortcuts. I mean, the parallels in the gym are you know, endless, but
well, a great example of that too is some of the demands of, like, we've heard athletes have suggested stuff like, you know, being paid on a regular basis by us or getting compensated, and models that look like the NFL or the NBA, and you say that, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the NFL and the NBA have a century basically of foundation and billion-dollar TV contracts, and we're this big. I mean, as big as we are, we're this big compared to those sports. We have to be realistic with who we are and where we are in the life cycle of the sport.
Yeah.
Do I think the sport can be that big? For fucking sure. But it might take us 50 years.
Yeah.
You know, I hope not. But like, it's going to take us a long time too, because they have a large foundation and experience. And
yeah.
rabid fan base.
And it's one of those things where it's like you have to be able to relay that with also helping people understand, like, hey, we want to be able to. If like it would be great if the NFL model was applicable right now for us. It's like if it was the sport was so good that we could pay all the athletes and do everything like that, like that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I'd love that if we were in that position, we would all be in a greater place.
Yeah.
And when we get to a point where we can do that, absolutely we will do that. Hey, but you know what? Like we need to have a year where we're not like in the red. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things that need to happen on the sports side first before like we can start having those discussions.
And isn't there something to be said for like it's got to go away for a little bit of time period during the year, so you miss it and you get fired up for the season? I've always said like if the NFL wanted to go to, there's a sweet spot there. I love the NFL, but if you try to make it like 18 games and you're like it's more like okay, wait, that's now I don't miss it.
That was the
special
big problem with last year's. I guess the last 2 seasons, it was just way too long, and the reason that it ended up that way was they tried putting all the value in other partners, other sanctional events being partnered with us in the fact that they got a spot to the games.
Yeah.
And so basically their value was a game spot. And so like Dubai Fitness Challenge or Dubai CrossFit Challenge, even though they were in December, they still wanted them to be part of our series and they wanted them to have a game spot. So that made it a year-round qualifying process. That was really confusing, obviously. And we don't have to dive into that.
Yeah. So along those lines, where are you now in the process of kind of determining what next season is going to look like?
We have a really good foundation that's laid out, and then I'm really excited. And I've shared some of the concepts with you, and we've shared them with a handful of people. Shared them with some, most of the sanctional directors. Shared them with some partners. Shared the ideas internally, and shared it with the PFAA. Talked to our athlete council about these ideas, because I could talk to those groups about these ideas because these ideas aren't like competition details,
right?
And so far the reception to it has been really positive. And I say it's because it's based in a foundation of reason, and that's kind of like my line. Like it's based in a foundation of reason, and there's a non-arguable reason for doing everything we're doing. Like it's based in numbers, it's based in the data, and it's like, okay, so why is there this number of qualifying spots out of this area? Why is there this number of events in this area? And it all is.
Yeah.
Oh man, you got me fired up.
No, I was really impressed. Like Dave, when he shared when some of the stuff they were thinking about. I mean,
you didn't even hint to him.
No, I mean it's like it's
that's why I'm all excited. I'm squirming in my chair over here.
You look at it like, well, what about? And then you look at the numbers, and you're like, yeah, okay. Like that's hard to argue against. So I mean, it's not like they're just throwing stuff up against a wall and be like, "Hey, we're going to do it for we'll figure out later." I mean, there's definitely some reason behind it.
And it's built to be scalable to whatever growth we have, and that's the thing. It kind of addresses some of that being too big. So interestingly, like the last format we had, I think was too big for where we were. And when you have like 3 events in China, I think they had 2 or 3 sanctional events in China in a country that has like less than 100 affiliates. Like maybe that's too many events, and like a country that has 6,000-7,000 affiliates has like 2 or 3 events.
Yeah,
you know that doesn't. The disparity there is too severe.
So with that being said, obviously you want to grow the sport in areas like China, and if you're not going to give them a ton of events, based on their size of their affiliate population, how do you foster growth in those areas?
Well, you're not going to get. So here's the notion: that you're not going to give them a ton of events that qualify people to the games, but they should have events. They should have stuff to build the feeder, to build the interest, and that's the other thing. The other notion that needs to be broken in our community, that the only value of doing an event with CrossFit is it's a qualifier to the games. Meaning, we should have 10. I'm going to say this number's not right, but we should have 10, 20 events in China, but they're all like intermediate level, beginner level, community events. They're all things to build up the interest, but they're not all qualifiers to the games.
They can bear that moniker of CrossFit and the support, understanding that like this is something that, I'm doing a CrossFit event like my friend in the United States or Canada or Sweden is doing, and that's the unifying label, if you will. Yeah,
exactly. And so, to give you a little preview, not to give too much, but to talk about next season. So it is going to be structured. It's going to start in probably February and end in August. Be more of a focused season for the games. And so you look at Dubai Fitness Challenge. I talked to Saud and that crew recently, and I said, hey, we still want to we have a major event for you. We still want to you have a major event for us. We still want to be working with you guys and have it as part of a series. and it's still going to be a CrossFit event, it's not going to have a spot to the games, and that's completely okay.
Yeah.
And I believe for this to grow for the athletes, for the community, not everything could be its only value is a spot to the games.
Yeah.
And that's how we're building the future.
Yeah.
So my question is then, and this is something Tommy and I have talked a lot about with just people in general, is that whatever the season is going to look like, if you don't have standardized programming and not everybody takes the same tests to get to the games, does that at all diminish your claim that you found the fittest, since not everybody took the same test to get there?
Well, we haven't decided on that yet, so it could end up being standardized programming. Even if it doesn't end up being standardized programming, the one idea I have, some sort of middle ground where we've never gone, and this is cool because it's new, is basically giving a template. And not the actual workouts, but a template of like, okay, so of the, let's call it 7, well, let's call it 6. Of the 6 events, 2 have to be a couplet, and 1 couplet has to be 2 to 4 minutes, and the other couplet has to be 4 to 6 minutes. 1 has to be a max lift. 1 has to be, a triplet of 9 to 12 minute duration, and 1 has to be a chipper that lasts 15 minutes.
Okay.
And you create whatever you want in that, and then we still approve it. And we look at it and we say, okay, this one's silly because it's the same movement patterns back and forth, and everything has squatting, so that doesn't make sense. So that's kind of a middle ground if we decide not to program them all, where we kind of give some constraints to where there's some consistency across, like where, one's not just testing all sub 2 minute workouts and then 1 5 minute workout, and that's the extent of their programming.
Well, I like that too, because it also creates a consistent dialogue between you and the event runners, and it's more of it feels like more of a collective power agreement in terms of trying to figure out best practices for programming and stuff like that.
Well, that's the other thing too. When we've talked to the sanctional directors, the current ones, going forward, we've conveyed, hey, this is not like the past. Like, we are in this with you. We're going to be working with you guys. We're going to be side by side. We're going to help you guys succeed, and you're going to help us succeed. And like, we're going in this as partners, not as independent players. And so, we haven't defined all of this yet, but I see like helping with judging, obviously sponsors, broadcast, just being, a holistic effort. It's going to be so much better, and it's going to be so good for the community and the sport.
Yeah.
Let's look ahead to stage 2, and that's going to be here. And I'm curious, now that you only have 10 athletes total, how does that affect the way that you program for the stage, as opposed to having you got 40 athletes or 160 or whatever it is?
Well, here's what's cool in the reality. So the programming was pretty much done before we decided to go to this format, and even with what we did at this stage, I kind of decided not to change the original programming. So regardless of because I really like what we're going to do, and it's changing the schedule, of course. Like the schedule is all getting chopped up because instead of having to do 4 heats, you have 1 heat. And there's going to be some where they're combined, meaning all 10 athletes are going to go. I always love when we do that, because it's so cool to see the women sometimes beat the men. Like at Madison on the run, swim, runs and stuff like that. It's really, I'm a huge fan of that. So some of those events are going to be combined, not all of them, but there's a few tweaks that are being made to the programming, but they're the same things that would have happened regardless if it was the field of 30. Okay. So the schedule changes, but not the foundation of the programming.
Yeah, that we have a Patreon where we have subscribers to our channel and stuff like that, and we have them submit questions and stuff like that for some of our big interviews, and that was like half of our questions. Like, people were asking, KEC Master, a couple other people, I want to give them shout outs for asking, if any of the pre-pandemic programming was going to stick around, and what sort of leeway the 10 athlete field provides you and things like that. And I will say this though, from just a personal standpoint, once this decision was made to move things to the ranch, what was the creative process like being, I think we touched on this a little bit last time, of being able to come home and be able to program and craft something in, quite frankly, a circumstance we probably won't ever get in again. That we won't ever be mandated to be here under these.
Hopefully, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
until in the next election year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, what was that creative process like for you?
It was amazing. It was really rewarding in terms of having, like, I come here every day 2 or 3 times a day. I don't live here, but I come here multiple times a day, and it was easy because I'm really like, and this is why I don't like to program for other events. People always ask me, hey, can you program for this event, or can you help me? I have to be there. And it sounds silly, but I have to feel the arena. I have to feel the grounds. I have to feel the environment. I program around the environment. And so here I live at this environment. I just said I don't live here, but I spend a lot of time here. And that's cool. I've never been in a place so when I wanted to feel Carson, I had to drive up to Carson.
Yeah.
And actually, I can't say I never lived in a place because there was a 3-year period where we were doing the games here, but I wasn't. Yeah, even then I wasn't living here. I was living in San Diego. So to go back to that, I've been here every day, and I kind of am in the environment. So it's been really cool and rewarding to just build it out here.
You're like Maximus. Have you seen Gladiator, the movie Gladiator?
Yeah.
He has to go up and pick a little bit of the dirt and like rub it in his hands a little bit before he just goes and wipes everybody out.
Yeah.
How do you?
Funny.
I've always given you credit for this. I think you do a fantastic job of putting on a great test, but also making it sort of a spectacle. So how do you thread the needle of, we're going to make this a really good test, but we're also going to make it look really cool. And sometimes one will take away from the other. So how do you find that middle ground?
Exactly, kind of how you said it. So, and even I talk about this. I use this word compromise a lot, but it's oftentimes, I'm going to make a compromise for the test. Not even a compromise, but I'm going to make adjustments to make the visual of the visual, put that at a premium and make that the highest priority. And so when you think of this, when you think of in the Coliseum events or events that are in the StubHub Center or Carson, in the tennis stadium, in Madison, in the premier venue, those are the visual is the priority. Yeah. Regardless of how it's in a flow, we're going to make it a really great visual. Sometimes when we go outdoors, some of those events, they're running all around campus, they're going to the lake. The visual there isn't as important, so I can think more of the length of the run, the kind of the test there. So when we're in the confines of a floor, usually speaking, the visual is amped up. And it's really cool looking back at coming back to this, you really come all the way back to here. In the 2000, I think the place we truly first experimenting with that, putting a kind of a precedent on making the visual, the race matter, was that chipper in 2009. So that chipper was programmed, they're going to go down the field, and then at the other end, they're going to get the plate, and they're going to lunge back. And that was like a real, I think, first, not even consciously knowing that we're going there or experimenting with it. Then you go the next year to Carson. We had what was that workout called? The ring muscle up and squat snatch.
Oh, Amanda.
And there was no visual. It was back and forth. And it's we need to start telling the story of how this workout could lay out. So, it starts off with a workout like you do, or a test like you do it in your box back and forth. And then it's what if we have one pull-up bar, and then the bar for that example, Amanda, you do your muscle-ups here, then you do your squat snatches, advance your bar. Go back, do your muscle-ups, do your squat snatches, advance your bar. So you're telling the story by seeing the bar advance down the floor. And then the next level of that is, what about 3 sets of gear? A bar here where they're doing their bar muscle. And I think we ended up doing that with Amanda eventually. Then squat snatches, then a new bar. And, the only reason we're able to pull that sort of dynamic off is because of our relationship with Rogue and their willingness to change the floor every night or to change the floor throughout the day and all the gear, obviously, they have. So that's incredibly important. I've told Justin this before early on in that 11, 12. I want to be able to, I think the fan should be able to sit up in the stands eating he could walk away, buy a hot dog and beer, come back and look at the floor and see who's winning. Yeah. And that's important. And that's why a lot of those events are laid out that way.
How much influence did television have on the way that you thought about an event and how it should lay out?
It's weird because I think those foundations were put in place before television, but it influenced it. But television really drove hitting timeline. Well, we always hit timelines, but really creating a timeline in advance that we could hit. And that's where you look at some of the wild years of the games, 12, 13. I mean, there was events on Sunday morning. There was games on Sunday morning. I'm sitting up in the stands programming the final of that day. And those days are long gone. We have all, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had all the programming obviously done before the event starts. Sometimes because of special gear, we have to program events. Oftentimes. they're programmed, but they're being tested the week of the games. And that's like where the demo team comes, they're really important. So if we, like last year, so last year's a great example. We didn't have much off-the-wall stuff. If you really look at last year's programming relative to, if you look at the year before, that year was off like the charts for creativity and like wildness. Like we had stuff like the slug,
chaos.
That was a great event.
The O course. Wasn't that the year we had the battlegrounds? Like that year. Some of those visuals need to be released. We should have someone make, the Buttery Boys, whoever, make that year's documentary. They want to. Because it's just such a great year of just like creativity and the visual. That was like the peak of it all. And then the next year, mostly because of all the changes and constraints, kind of went back to like, everything there was pretty core. So the reason I say that is, so you look at that previous year, the 18 year, there, since there was a lot of stuff we'd never done before, like the slug, or like that combat course, or chaos I was able to test before we got there, because chaos minus the slug part was all conventional. But that kind of dictates us having to do a lot of testing right before the event starts. But even then, it's pretty much determined like time frame and what it's going to fit into.
Yeah.
I've totally forgot my next question. I know what I want to ask you. There's going to be people who, this goes to next season. There's a segment of population that is not in the individuals, but there are, there's teams, there's masters. What if any changes can they expect to the structure of their season, or do you foresee that being basically the same thing that we've done in the past? And I know teams, you can probably work them through whatever your event schedule is, but masters and teenagers are always like, well, what about us?
So it's not going to be a what about us anymore for them. They're like, meaning we're going to give them a lot of attention. And honestly, at this stage, it's probably, I'd be lying if I said that the masters and teens are going to have their own events to qualify to the games. It'll probably still be an online, but it'll be, we'll probably take 30 or 40 per division.
Nice, okay.
We'll expand it. We're definitely not going to take 10, maybe 20. Let me just back up and just backtrack a little in case we get
You got a lot of guys strapping on knee sleeves right now. I got a chance.
10 is not going to happen. At least 20. I'd like to see 30 or 40 if the numbers can pull it off. Teams, we've put out that we're doing the affiliate cup, and it's going to be the affiliate competition. And most likely through the same qualification process that the individuals will go through, although I have some ideas. Let me let her loose so she can.
Yeah, sure.
We can pause this. All right, Dave is going to go deal with his dog. Bring her over. She can be part of the interview. There goes Doug, happy, just bounding all over the place, ready to go outside.
I love it when dogs have that like bound where they're
they turn
running
into rabbits.
And their hips turn.
Oh yeah.
So they can't. They're so
They
excited.
don't know what they're doing.
They can't like square up.
They do the jump and the opposite paw thing.
Yep.
Up and right back in. Hey, Doug. What's up, sweetie? You're so pretty. You can sit right there. You want to sit right there? Okay. All right. So we were talking teams and masters.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about the teams or the teens, I should say, the age group, the young age groups, there's really not that many of them. Like when you look at the open numbers, there's only, I think in the 16 to 17, I think the highest number males is like 2,000 people. And that's really low when you look at like 30,000 from the 35 to 39-year-old division.
Yeah.
So their field needs to come up in numbers to kind of justify much more.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, so the growth is like, so when like that age group says, hey, we really want qualifiers to get to the games, when I'm saying there's 1,000 of you in total in the world registering for the open, like it's talk about outgrowing or going further than what's ready for.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the age group, the 35 to 39 division, I think had like 30,000 people in it last year. Okay, so there we can have the discussion at least, or look at options, because that's much bigger than some of, and the later divisions. When you get to the elder divisions, some of the numbers just drop
significantly.
Yeah.
We get this question a lot. I know that you have, I think, a year or two left in Madison. I'm not sure exactly what the exact numbers are, but would the games ever go international? And if so, like, what do you need? Like, what's the what's the perfect facility? Like what does a facility need to have in order for you to say, yeah, you know what, we can go there and make this happen?
Multi-use venues work pretty well. Will the games ever go international? I think they have to at some point, right? Like as this grows and as this becomes such a premier event, I believe it already is international, and that's represented in our participation in our affiliates and in like even the podium, frankly. But to truly go or to take the event international, I think that's a few years off. And but I think we should definitely be there. And when I say a few, maybe not like 2 or 3, but 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. Who knows what it is? But it's definitely not something we should write off or be afraid to do. A multi-use venue. So like when you look at soccer stadiums or football stadiums, you know what? They're just too big.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like places that hold 60,000 people, 60 to 100,000 people, our sport isn't there. And and you know, like having that. But when you look at basketball courts or tennis stadiums that fit up to 20,000 people, those look really, you know, those are a good place to start off of and to anchor. Now, if you had a tennis stadium or a basketball court that also had a nice large field next to it, so multi-use venues that have a lot of flexibility. That's why I believe Carson was a great footprint.
Yeah.
Carson was a great place to learn how to run this event and take it other places. Madison's been great too, obviously, especially because we essentially built a second multi-use venue out in the parking lot.
A couple of questions that we have from our Patreon that I want to ask. One, this one's from Molly Hayes. So specifically to this last weekend, how did some of the events that you decided to go with, so the four benchmark workouts, how did they evolve over time from the early demo testing? Was there any significant changes that you made to those 4 in particular?
They changed a lot in the yellow pad phase. They changed a lot here. By the time we were testing them, they were pretty close. And we didn't make many changes off the testing. Nasty Nancy, Damn Diane, they were both like pretty, programmed, tested. We had a really short duration from when we decided to do this to when they were created, to when we tested, to when we had to launch them. I should have, and I would have liked to have had maybe some more testing subjects, but it's hard, especially with COVID and like traveling, people coming out, and I don't really like sending them to people to do. I'd like to see them do them.
Yeah.
So they didn't change much.
Yeah.
Are there any hints that you want to give for stage 2 of the game? So Jason Carroll put a video out there. It was just him doing some wild stuff on some machines and said, here's what you can expect. I don't know if that's accurate, if it's him just messing around, but I would like to give you an opportunity to maybe follow up on that. You know,
it's funny because when Nikki asked me that question, I actually wasn't ready for it, and so I just said what my default was, which was no. And then 10 seconds later, I was like, actually, I have a lot I want to say. But I almost tried reining you guys in and saying, hey, actually bring the camera back. But that would have been too much, especially in that format. Yeah, exactly. People would have lost their minds back in the control room. So I think she even phrased it like, will we see a theme of some of the way that these were done carried over? And as I thought about it, yeah, absolutely, actually. And it's interesting. Yes. Some of what happened in stage thematically will carry over. So you can kind of guess and take that where you want, but there's not going to be Nasty Nancy. There's not going to be Damn Diane, but some variance, let's call it. You might see some variance of some things. And it's going to be, I believe, I say this often, it's going to be one of the hardest tests they ever do. And it's going to be one of the most complete and the most grueling and some of the most challenging days they ever face in CrossFit Games competition. So I'm really excited. I think there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of, let's call it twists. There's a lot of things that will challenge and test these guys. And it's not over. And it really isn't. And the scoring restarts, and Matt's going to have to work to win.
Yeah,
sure.
And that's the reality. He doesn't have this sealed up, and that's what's exciting about it. I mean, he's obviously the favorite, but and he knows this, and that's what makes him a professional and the champion that he is. He's still going to have to put in a lot of work, especially when you got guys like Noah and some of these other guys breathing down his neck to win.
You touched on something there that one of our patrons asked Brad Marshall, what led to the decision to reset the scores after athletes arrived to stage 2 and not have any sort of carryover?
I think the biggest reason is it's a ton of events. It is a super full and comprehensive competition. I can't go into the number, but it's like a massive CrossFit Games. So therefore, the test should start over because it's a new phase of the test. It's a new period separated by a month. And why that's significant is, did you do your homework and did you continue to prepare and we got that you were prepared for this stage, but are you prepared for the next? And did you work on the things that, maybe you didn't work for this stage but needed to work on at the next stage? So I'm a big fan of it resetting. I don't like this past. This event was the past. Now we move on to the future, and let's just compete against each other with this future format.
Mm-hmm. Let Tommy sit down again. I have a question, and I'd love to get your take on this, is that I look at the field, and I look at Tia and Matt, and they seem to be, not only the best, but they seem to be getting better. And that gap is not narrowing. And I can't, for the life of me, figure out why no one on either side seems to be gaining any ground. It's not like they're not training. It's not like they don't have coaches. It's not like they're not eating right. And I'm just interested to, I guess the way I sort of wrap my head around it is like, Matt and Tia are the rare combination of God-given talent and a maniacal drive to win. And when you have those two things that combine, you just can't beat them. But there's got to be, I just don't understand why it's just not even getting closer at all.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it is getting a little closer. When you look at Brooke, she was only 35 points.
True.
And maybe 35 is a lot, but it's also not.
True.
When you look at Matt's gap, that's a significant gap. There was, almost 70-something points between him and second. Mm-hmm. But the gap between Brooke, and you look at how Brooke did, she surprised the shit out of me, to be honest. Yeah. But you look at how Brooke did across the board, she's not as dominant as Tia, but Tia had a 16th place finish. I get it, it was a handstand hold. And Brooke's lowest finish was a 10th. So arguably, the gap's closing. And the thing is, this event is going to be so much and so wild and so unknown that, they're not safe. Yeah. And I mean that, they're going to have to work really hard in any one of these athletes. And you know what? I love that Haley pulled it off, too, because it's funny because even I think we might have talked to this, but people talked about her not being able to clean that bar at the games, and so they questioned her strength, and even I did. But I quickly backed off, the first event at the games that year was not light. I would consider that a medium to medium heavy load, and and for me it was puzzling that she didn't have any issue with that, but she did have issue with the clean. But I do believe even last year she deserved to be there, and I think she really proved it this year by earning another ticket back. Yeah. 4 of those 5 women were in the top 10 last year. Brooke was the only one of the girls coming that was not a top 10 games athlete.
Yeah. And it's funny, you mentioned Drake Sladkey. He's a judge. I think he's L1. He asked, he wanted me to ask you, can Haley, do you think, beat Tia at some point? That's all he asked.
Absolutely. And here's why. That's the she's getting better. She's been great. She qualified top 10 in the games. Now she's top 5. She was a youth competitor. Did she win when she was?
Yeah, she won once.
She won when she was youth. So she's just climbing up, and she's 19. And so, but imagine how good she's going to be by the time she's 24 or 5. Yeah. And you know what? By the time she's 24 or 25, how old's Tia at that point? If Tia's still competing, you'd have to, in a few years, you're going to have to put your money on someone like Haley over Tia again, because time never loses. That clock is undefeated.
That is absolutely true. A couple more questions. First is, how does COVID play into what your plans are for not only the immediate future, but also next year? Because it's not like...
Well, we got a great COVID plan for next year. Because here's the reality I'm coming to grips with the COVID landscape is... it's not going to be universal in application, meaning the entire world is shut down. And our event is even our season next year is a very global sport. and a very global footprint. So meaning, and even in the U.S., like, hey, this part of the country is closed, but this part of the country is not. So we're creating plans around what to do in areas that are closed, not to like, okay, California is closed, but the rest of the world's open, but we're going to go to this drastic plan of everything's online now. No, that's not the fallback. The fallback is a plan that takes into consideration the local areas and where they're at.
Okay.
It's important.
Yeah, because that is exactly the reality of it, is every area, every state, even within states, every county is different, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, do you feel like being in California kind of helped that? Because like you said, I mean, Aromas basically sits in the Tri-County area, and you can go to Santa Cruz and it's open. You can go to Monterey and it's not. You can go 100 meters that way and it's Hollister and it's wide open.
Yeah, like restaurants and
yeah,
totally. Living out here, and it's funny because as I've lived out here, and especially being in this ag area where there's a lot of produce and a lot of the country's food comes from, we were never really that closed.
Yeah.
Stores were, but like out and about, you saw a lot of people, a lot of activity, a lot of action. And so I think I didn't go through the experience that a lot of other people did with like really being locked down.
Final question, if we don't have any more, do we have any further?
I got a couple patrons.
We'll do the patron questions and we'll wrap it up.
Cool. This one's from Christy Foster. The task of programming the test is a massive undertaking. While you're the face of the programming now, can you explain and talk about who else is a part of your process from conception to execution? And how do you personally handle the inevitable criticism that is directed at you?
That's a great question. On the first part, so at stages when I share parts, that's where like I get feedback and I hear from people. And one of the big process or parts for that is in the testing. Like, I'll have the athletes do it and you'll see how they do it and you'll talk to them and you'll talk about how they feel and I'll get their feedback. A lot of the creative, it's hard. I don't think creative like this works super well in a collaborative environment. I think, and you look at some of the greatest artists in the world, they didn't collaborate on some of those paintings or some of the things they do or create. And that's the way I feel about this. And I'm not trying to compare myself to that, but that's how I perceive that. Like that's
Pablo Castro.
I really feel like, because to me it is, the phrase is the magic is in the movement, the art is in the programming, and the science is in the explanation. The art really is in the programming to me, and I really take that to heart. And so, oftentimes I have to do it completely alone. It's just like I get in the zone and I make something that I think is really good happen. And then as I can back out, I can start sharing and discussing. But because we have tried in different periods trying to be more collaborative, and maybe it's just me, but it didn't work too well. Now that being said, there are things, I don't program everything. So like, especially the last few years, the age group competitions, the online age group competitions, all those stages, I'll delegate to someone else to program. And then what I do is I chop it up, or I'll give feedback, or I'll say, no, do this or do that. No, this theme here is something I'm looking at doing, so I don't want you doing because we're doing it at the games. Or follow this theme. There's one year where we had no burpees in any stage, and then someone, I think it might have been Pat at the time, programming for the Masters, had some burpees. I'm like, hey, chop the burpees just because I want that theme to carry across all competitions. So my only point there is there are, and that will expand. As this all grows, there will be a point where someone else is programming just the games, and it's going to work that way. I'll give feedback and we'll discuss it. But what was the second part of the question? Oh, how did the feedback? So most of the time I ignore. Most of the time I ignore unless it's positive feedback. So there's a difference between just like unconstructive feedback and positive feedback. And most of the time what you see on social media is very unconstructive. And for a large part, I really just don't acknowledge or even the non-constructive feedback. But interestingly, so there was a shift, and you could see that after this last documentary, after the Buttery Boys' last thing, where I watched it and I'm listening to some of the things the guys said, and I'm like, that's wrong, or no, that's not what and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just point out why that's the only side to the story, and that's what went down with Valner, Fikowski. I think Sarah said something, and to those things, I just wanted to say the other end of the picture. Actually. I think, what did Sarah say? whatever, you guys all know. Like
Yeah.
there was things that were said where I was like, no, that's actually not the case. This is what we were trying to do, or this is what we did, or this is what the actual numbers said. And those weren't like my opinions. Most of what I tried putting back, and if you research, I'd like to check actually on my own, is like facts. Like, hey, no, actually, this is what it was. You know, the running thing was a big thing. It was all the running games. Well, 6 of the 13 events or whatever had running. And you know, that's a big argument we already went down before. But so to tie that together, I think when some of the bigger named athletes now have decided to share their side or their perspective on some of the stuff, through that phase, through watching that doc, I'm like, okay, I'm going to respond. And we talked about this too. I think it's fair that I decide, hey, they have a voice. I want to say the counter to that. I want to say our perspective or my side, because in absence of doing that, the only narrative heard is theirs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you like being a little bit of the villain?
Well, here's the deal. I don't mind it, is what it is, but I really want to be known as like, completely unbiased and honest, and just like, you know what you're getting, and you know what you're like. There's no hidden agenda. There's no like, I'm gonna hold the line to this sport and the truth of this sport to a fault, and I don't want people to get away with. Again, painting negative or incorrect narratives on something that wasn't what was going on, or that wasn't the intent of it. And oftentimes my bluntness and my way of communicating sometimes is perceived as being the villain, but it's not intentional. It's just who I am, and it's where I come from, and it's what I am. And like, I'm a no bullshit type of guy, and I work that way with my teams, and I expect people to work that way with me. And sometimes it comes off the way it does.
Maybe antagonist should have been a better word than villain. But do we have any more?
Yeah, I got 2 more. One is, this is from Stefan Ravang. He said, your thoughts about this being a complete test, keeping in mind that 3 out of the 7 events were in the 3-minute range. And then a follow-up from Joe Agier. Does the leaderboard as it stands surprise you at all?
So I contend that 3 out of the events were in the 3-minute range, only from my averages.
Yeah.
And so my averages, event 2 was 3 to 5 seconds, so that's a heavy lift. I'm sorry, event 1.
Yeah.
No, that is event 2.
Event 2, yeah.
Event 6, the average time was 1:15. Event 4, the average time was, and I'm looking at averages, average time was 3:13. And then so event 1, there was 3-minute times, but the average time was 4:47.
So close to about the 5-minute range.
Yeah, so I'd say event 1 was closer to, 5 minutes. And then event 3 was 5:30. Then we had a 10:47 and a 21:49. So looking at the averages of these across the board, and that's where I also come up with, okay, maybe something in that 7 to 8 minute range would have been nice. But even all that being said, even with these, and look, the first 3, they're all the single modalities, the lift, the handstand hold, and the row. You all knew those were going to be on the shorter end.
Yeah.
And then of the actual CrossFit, like the pure CrossFit events, the 4:47 to 5:31, those are really close.
Yeah.
I think maybe Diane could have been pushed out a little more, maybe on the depth or on the...
They went faster than I thought they were going to go, to be honest.
They did go faster. I actually thought so. It's funny, in these averages, this is basically around what I expected, but where you see the you look at Matt's times, he has like a 2:44 and a 3, or what is it?
A 3:08 for Fran.
Yeah, 3:08. So like Matt's times are, but he's also Matt.
Yeah,
right?
I think people base what they think the average is off of the top times,
right?
Rather than taking into account the people that don't do well and collectively kind of putting that together. That's a good point.
The average was spot on for our tester too. For Nancy, 21 minutes was about where Hobart, our tester, finished. Yeah.
I just pictured him just dying coming in for that last round and just not.
He did all the overheads unbroken in just nice form, and he looked great. He kind of got worked on Annie. His time was so the average here was 10:47. His average was not 10:47, or his time was not 10:47.
Right on. Cool. Yeah, I think that's about it. Last one. Leaderboard as it stands surprise you at all? Any names you kind of go across and you're like, that's a little bit surprising to me?
So I was surprised that, well, after day one, I was surprised how Katrin recovered. And it's like, I shouldn't be because she always does that. Brooke and Haley kind of surprised me. I didn't expect them to get back up in there, but, up on the leaderboard that high. Cara, she was a little surprised to fall out. On the men's side, it's interesting because, Sarah did not surprise me at all.
Yeah.
And that's only because that's consistent with how she performs at the games.
Yeah.
And honestly, Fikowski and Vellner didn't surprise me much either.
Yeah.
Like the past couple of years, last year especially, their scores this year are almost consistent with their scores last year, or their final ranking.
Yeah, I think Vellner was battling something that he didn't reveal beforehand. I think he had a groin injury that he kind of kept quiet.
Okay.
That was, if you look at the squatting events specifically, those are the ones that hurt him, and then it came out after the fact that. But
Chandler, I'm kind of surprised he didn't pull it off.
he's close.
He's close.
Yeah. Impressive though. Still impressive.
I'm surprised at how many U.S.-based athletes are in the top. That's a surprise to me. I thought it would be. It's usually 50-50.
Yeah.
That the distribution would be biased towards that.
Well, you have 4 athletes in Quant, Medeiros, Brooke, and Haley, and the average age amongst them is 22 years old. So you have, 4 of the 10, 40%, or 22
Well,
below.
So that's important to know, and that's a great stat because that is the trend of all of this. This is only, and that's why I'm saying Matt specifically Tia too, but it's only a matter of time before it's all. And we saw this in our sport start to happen a few years ago, where it's like you watch the NBA or you watch the NFL, and they're like, so-and-so's lost a step. And I'll Google, how old is he? He lost a step.
27.
He's 30. Yeah, he's 30.
Yeah.
He's 30 and he's lost a step. And
Yeah.
that same sort of thing's happening in our sport, where once you hit close to 30 and 30, and that was kind of the justification for the 35 to 39. Because on the men's side, the reality is, even across this and across this field, the men's field is generally speaking much tighter.
Yeah.
And in abilities, minus Matt kind of is above everyone else. But everyone else is pretty consistent or close in abilities. But what started to happen is, as you saw these older athletes, back then it was Spieler and some of those guys getting into their 30s, they're quickly slipping out. And that's even, and of course, the one exception to that on this side is, where is she?
Briggs.
Yeah. But she's just an exception. And that will eventually not even be possible. As the field increases and the level of competitor increases, it's all going to be tight. And you're not going to be able to be 35 years old in the CrossFit Games.
Yeah.
The older you get, the better you were.
Yeah.
So I asked you this last time, and we'll finish on the same thing. But what are you most excited about now as you move into the future? Not only what's coming up in stage 2, but what's coming up in 2021?
Well, I'm excited about just righting the ship in 2021 and just getting this sport back on track and getting the enthusiasm amongst us, amongst the athletes, amongst the fans, amongst the partners, getting everyone fired up to see the full potential of where we can go. Because we were close, and as you guys know, we were kind of chopped off at the knees, and now we're going to bring that back, and we're going to get it, and we're going to express the full potential of it, and that's exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. A quick follow up to that. After seeing stage 1 play out, obviously you're involved programming, operations side, can be a little part of the production side as too. What are you most proud of about the team from stage 1?
Well, that we pulled it off with such short notice. From the time we decided to do this to the time we actually did it was a few weeks. And I mean, when did you get the call to be involved? Probably a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it was a week and a half.
Yeah. So and that we scrambled and not have, and the thing is, our teams don't have a lot of experience doing this because there's not a lot of other CrossFit events that are, streaming and or doing stuff like this. So it's not because we haven't been doing it, Rogue has a little, but it's not like all these guys have months and months of experience working together. So that we pulled it off with such short notice and did the best we could, and which was really good. That's cool.
Yep. Yeah. Well, listen, Dave, we always appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I'm excited for next season. I really am, and I think once you guys get to the point where you're going to release more, I think people are going to get really fired up about what's
I'm excited too.
All right. Thanks for doing this, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks.